Hi, everyone. Welcome to Let's Talk Books. I'm Christina Chiu, author of Beauty, and we have a really wonderful evening tonight because it's a topic that actually I think resonates not just with me, but with many people. The theme really is about unsung women, and we have two amazing authors. First, Patty Dann, say hi.
Hello.
And we have Bethany Saltman. Say hi.
Hello.
Wonderful. Patty will be our first reader tonight. I will say, I do want to say that we had three readers tonight. The third was Evette Dionne. She was a journalist, and some of you might know her because she's editor-in-chief at Bitch Media, and she's a great writer. Unfortunately, she had a really terrible family emergency, so she cannot make it tonight. But if you are friends with her, please reach out to her and send her our love. So Patty Dann is the author of 7 books, both fiction and nonfiction. She also writes personal essays published in the New York Times, the Boston Globe, and other numerous publications. Her new novel is based on the Wright brothers' often overlooked sister, Catherine Wright. The book is called The Wright Sister. And Patty also had a very famous book called Mermaids, and that happened to be turned into a movie. And I'll never ever forget when I saw it. It was the most awesome thing. And I was coming out of college, and I ended up reading the book and trying to be in her class because she teaches at the Writer's Voice on the West Side, 63rd Street. And of course, I couldn't get in because she was teaching this class for older people, like you had to be a certain age, and I was too young. Can you believe that? But now I'm taking classes with her, so I'm happy about it now. So everyone, please welcome Patty Dann. She's amazing.
Christina and Bethany and everybody out there, it's just a great pleasure to be here tonight. And I'm sorry, it's just us, but hopefully in another time we can have a larger group. Yes, I do write fiction and nonfiction. I became fascinated by Catherine Wright, the younger sister of Wilbur and Orville, and I have this new book out with Harper Perennial, and I'm very excited about it. I was always interested in the Wright brothers because they invented the airplane. I was also sort of intrigued because they were these two very quirky, dapper men who never married, the sons of a reverend. And only recently, in the past 5 years, did I become aware of their younger sister, Catherine. And Catherine was the only one who went to college. She went to Oberlin and graduated in 1898.
Wow.
Which is quite remarkable. I could talk more about that. But on a personal note, what interested me was Catherine married at 52 for the first and only time. And when she did, Orville refused to speak to her ever again. I mean, ever again. And so she moved 600 miles to live with her husband, Harry Haskell, a journalist who had been widowed. And they all knew one another, and Orville did too. So it wasn't as if this was such a startling match. It was startling that it was 52. But he had gone to Oberlin, as his late wife did. And when he died, his wife died, Catherine sent a condolence letter. They corresponded and fell in love. I'm also interested in it because I married in my 50s for the second time to a widower journalist, and that's exactly how we met as well. So I'd like to just read the opening. The structure of the book is letters to her brother Orville and what she calls a marriage diary. So I will just read really the opening entry into what she calls her marriage diary. It's dated I have to say, this is all imagined. So it's the genre is historical fiction, but it's heavily based on my imagining. These are not real letters. November 21st, and this is the diary, 1926. On November 20th, 1926, I was 52 when I got married for the first and only time to Harry Haskell. But my brother Orv, with whom I share a birthday, refused to attend the festivities. This was just yesterday at 4 p.m. When Orv heard of my upcoming nuptials last year, he smashed the blue and white Limoges china pitcher full of daisies against the wall of our summer house on Lake Huron. Everyone in the world knows Orv as the Wright brother who has a mustache and wears zigzag socks, ones that I knit every year with the soft yarn from the sheep outside of Dayton he insists upon because of his sensitive feet. The flowers scattered like an exploded bridal bouquet as the water and bits of china littered the floor. It has occurred to me more than once that although Orv is brilliant, ingenious, extraordinary, and able to study the subtle arc of a seagull's wings and to create an invention that has changed the entire planet, unfortunately, he might be also insane. I do not say such a thing lightly or with any disrespect. I love Orv, in what some say is an uncommon love. But I think all love is uncommon if it is worth its salt. I'm calling this diary my marriage diary, as conjugal life is such a new adventure for me. I do not know how I will fare with this curious tie that binds. This diary is nothing fancy, just a worn, toffee-colored notebook I have saved from my Oberlin days. There's a nifty envelope inside the back cover where I keep some precious drawings of my scribbles and designs. My penmanship remains steady from my years as a school teacher. I am writing in the most beautiful heron blue ink that Orv gave me as a Christmas gift just 2 years ago, when my life seemed to be quite humdrum after years of living with the most famous brothers to ever leave the earth. I keep the diary in a locked box with copies of letters I've begun to write to Orv, not that I imagined Harry would be interested. I vowed to take these new seasons of my life, fall and winter, and begin anew, to be bold where I have been timid and strong where I have hesitated. I've always been a woman of science and scholarly pursuits, along with my work for the rights of women. But in my new life, I hope to be able to write some truths about another kind of rights, secrets, both professional and personal, aspects that have been previously hidden. We discussed much in the Wright household, but there was much we did not say. It will not come easily to me to reveal what for so long was concealed, as I am the Reverend's daughter. Thank you. So that's just the opening, and then it's interspersed diary entry and letters to Orv.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. I have the book. I can't wait to read it. I would like to say that we have had many authors come through Let's Talk Books, as well as other programs from New York Writers Workshop. For those of you who aren't aware of New York Writers Workshop, it's an alliance of published authors, fiction, nonfiction, journalism, like poetry, everything. And we basically offer professional guidance, resources, and workshops for that teach craft and foster creativity and help writers kind of get going. So I'm not sure. I think Patty has actually taught in the program before. And if you ever get a chance to study with her, you must absolutely, I shouldn't say that because I'm always clamoring to get into her class. But yeah, you should. She's as good as her writing. So thank you for supporting New York Writers Workshop and our authors. I'm posting links to their work, so if you could please support them and purchase their work, I'm sure you will not be sorry. You will be really excited that you have a good piece of fiction during COVID that you can read and you can feel like you're doing something worthy. So thank you very much, Patty. Our next reader is Bethany Saltman. She's written for The New Yorker, New York Magazine, Atlantic Monthly, Parents, and other magazines. Strange Situation, A Mother's Journey into the Science of Attachment is her first book. Bethany received her MFA in poetry from Brooklyn College, where she studied with Allen Ginsberg. everyone, please welcome Bethany Saltman.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Yeah, here is, whoops, how do I do this? There's the book. Yes. And just to clarify, I've published work in the New Yorker, but it wasn't actually my work, because before I wrote a book, I was a professional researcher and editor and book coach. And so a lot of my work has appeared in the New Yorker, but not under my byline. So I just want to make sure right off the bat, I'm not, saying anything incorrect. So I am a longtime writer and researcher and editor. And this book, Strange Situation, is my first book of my own. I worked on it for 10 years. After my daughter Azalea was born, today was her first day of high school, such as it was. She's going on a hybrid model, but she did go to high school today. And but when she was born 14 years ago, I felt, as much as I loved her and I had a lot of affection for her and I didn't have any trouble, quote, bonding, I also noticed that I was still myself. And I had sort of bought a lot of the stories around motherhood that I was supposed to turn into a new person, someone who didn't ever get impatient or resentful or angry. And I, being the person that I am, a researcher and writer and editor, I started sort of looking into, this parenting business. And I started to come across the term attachment. And as many of you may know, I originally stumbled upon it in terms of Dr. Sears' so-called attachment parenting, which is about wearing a kid in a sling and co-sleeping and nursing and never crying it out and that kind of thing. And I felt like that can't be right. Like there cannot be a checklist of behaviors that's necessary to raise a decent human being. And so I kept digging and I came across attachment in the science of attachment. And specifically Mary Ainsworth, one of the mavericks of attachment, and her incredible laboratory procedure called the Strange Situation, which to this day, excuse me, is the gold standard for research around the world to observe and understand the nature of a child's tie to its mother. So in a 20-minute laboratory procedure, it's a series of comings and goings. A trained observer can understand how securely attached the child is to the parent, which has been shown to affect absolutely everything about that child's life for the rest of their life, and in fact, be passed down generation after generation. So I went into this work wanting to find out what kind of mother I was and wanting to learn everything I could about the strange situation. And I stumbled upon Mary Ainsworth, the unsung hero of attachment science, because when we hear about attachment, we think of Dr. John Bowlby, the British psychiatrist who came up with the concept of attachment. And she actually worked with him in England and doubted everything that he said. And she ended up going to Uganda to test his theory because she didn't believe it. And well, her husband got a job there, so she went. The minute she went there and sort of pulled together this very scrappy research project, she realized that he was right. And so she ended up spending the rest of her life doing the research that made John Bowlby's theories come to life and become the life-changing work that it is. And attachment is now probably the most robust creative line of research from the 20th century in psychology. So she is the unsung hero of that work. And so my book is my journey into the science of attachment. It's my memoir. It's my, going into all these labs and trainings and trying to understand what the science is about, and also about her life. And she is quite the figure. She was born in 1913 and she died in 1989. Very well celebrated in the field, but not publicly known. And so my book is really a homage to her as well as to her work. So I chose a couple parts from one of the first chapters of the book called Beautiful Child. And I pieced together a little bit so that you could get to know Mary a little. Sorry, I know it's here. Okay. Let me get the light here. Sorry, it's a little awkward for me to read and get the light right. Okay, when Mary Ainsworth arrived in Uganda, she was 42 years old. She had received her PhD rather late, having enlisted in the Canadian Women's Army Corps during World War II. So she was eager to get started on the academic career she had been working toward since she entered the University of Toronto at the young age of 16. But her husband, Len, had received a position at the University of East Africa, and she went with him. She had spent the previous 4 years working with Dr. John Bowlby in London, another overseas stint she'd gone on because of Len, who had been completing his degree there. Bowlby was working out his theory that the love babies feel for their parents had evolved to keep them close and safe, like geese lined up behind their mother. This attachment, he believed, was at the root of the child-parent relationship and stood in stark opposition to the prevailing theory of child-parent affection at the time, one that posited that babies love their mothers because their mothers feed them. If the so-called theory of cupboard love was correct, it wouldn't matter if a child was separated from a parent as long as someone was there to boil the peas. Bowlby, who had been working with orphans and delinquents in post-World War II England, knew that was wrong. He saw firsthand how these separated children were, in fact, deeply mourning the loss of their parents. Mary, like almost all the psychologists of her day, didn't buy Bowlby's theory at first, so she set out to see for herself. For a few very happy months, Mary traveled through the villages, observing the women, their children, and their world. Mary was with these families through their children's milestones, first wife, second wife dramas. There was a group of polygamous families in her sample, and one tragic death. She watched the mothers cradle their ill infants, sit them up for photographs, bathe them several times a day, carry them on their backs, and smile at them from across the room. She brought the children candy and relished watching them eat it, their little bodies sticky with sweetness. Mary's days were completely absorbed in her observing and in her wondering, showering these unbelievably lucky families with her wise and loving attention. As payment to the 26 families who finally agreed to be involved in Mary's study, she offered to drive the women and their children to and from the clinic in nearby Kampala for their routine checkups and shots and whenever they were sick. It was a valuable service in a community where transportation was difficult and illness was common. Here she had a chance to sit with the babies in a new, strange, and slightly scary situation, and to watch them be afraid and then be soothed by their mothers, or not. Trying to distract them, she let the babies play with the pencils in her purse or watch them get momentarily distracted by her oddly white, sandaled feet. Then she'd watch them retreat from her, back onto their mother's lap, when they'd had enough of her games or were afraid. What she learned in those hours of sitting with babies and their mothers in the hot waiting room planted the seeds for the development of what would come later, one of the most important laboratory procedures in the history of psychology.
Ah!
Dun, dun, dun.
Now there's a good reaction. So let's talk a little bit about this work. This is lovely. So you stumbled upon this woman, and I guess I have two questions to start off. One, why do you think she was so easily dismissed? And secondly, how did you decide that this was someone you were going to write a whole book, like that she would be a major figure in your book?
Well, she found me, to be totally honest. I when I saw her picture for the first time online, I just thought, who is this? She was so kind of formal, but she had this really open, beautiful face. She kind of reminded me of my grandma Burl. She was so, there's just something about her, how do you know when you fall in love? It was like that. I just felt this delight in her. And so I feel she chose me, and she has been a healing figure for me, like a spirit guide, as my husband said it. One walk was so helpful when I was trying to figure out what is the deal with me and Mary in this book. And he said, you're Yoda, which is exactly right. She, from the great beyond, she is teaching me not only about attachment, but about myself, about how to tell this story, because she was such a digger. She, nothing could stop her. She was just diving into this research with her, she didn't have any idea where she was going at first, which is very scary. And it was the chaos of human experience. And then she started to discern these patterns of attachment. So I just loved that about her. Why is she so easily dismissed? I think we know the answer to that. She's a woman. We live in a patriarchal society. She, if you Google her, you will often see people say she was John Bowlby's student. She was never his student. She worked with him. They were peers. It's just, it's the nature of patriarchy. I mean, it's really that simple, because her work is profound. She's a brilliant genius. And we wouldn't be where we are in terms of psychology and attachment if it weren't for her.
Thank you. I actually will come back, circle around to another question related to that. But first, I wanted to ask Patty, how did you come around? Like, what resonated with you that made you decide to write a whole book?
It's such a good question, Christina. And I think what Bethany said is really a lesson for all writers. You have to be passionately interested. It's a long slog. It's many drafts. And you can't just intellectually be thinking, oh, these are interesting women. It has to grab you. And this woman grabbed you. It had to do with mothers and children. In this case, and it is this similar in that I was interested in the Wright brothers. And, I was never, so knowledgeable of the sister. People thought perhaps she was the wife of Orville. And yet she personally spoke to me, because I was getting married in my 50s, and people would say, oh, it's nice to have a companion, and it's like, what? And I'm a second wife to somebody who had a long first marriage. And that whole social structure, even though it's 2020, is still quite old fashioned. The other thing is about Catherine, right? As you're married, she really was quite well known in her day, and yet nowadays people would say, oh, I didn't know they had a sister. But in other words, there were all these conflicts. She was allowed to go to college, and yet she was expected to go home and take care of the boys and manage the house. And she was a teacher. Teachers were not allowed to be married for years in this country. If you look at a list of regulations for teachers, female teachers, 1915, no loitering in ice cream stores, no dyeing of your hair, dresses must not be shorter than 2 inches above the ankles. You have to be home by 8 unless it's with a family member. So you cannot be married and be a teacher, because you might get pregnant, and then nobody could see you pregnant. You couldn't take care of other people's children. So here we have such archaic rules, and yet this woman very possibly helped invent the airplane, which changed the planet. So she spoke to me as somebody struggling and conflict, and on a very personal level, a woman marrying a widower after a long marriage.
Well,
I wanted to just say one thing about that. I think that the way patriarchy works, it's not that a woman like Mary didn't get accolades when she was doing her work. She did. Like you're saying, Patty, people loved her. She was beloved. She was respected. She won all kinds of prizes. But what does history do in a patriarchy? It just naturally orients toward men. And so, it's not so simple as to say she was ignored or she didn't get her due when she was alive. She fought all the time, people saying she was Bowlby's student, and she fought to be heard and she fought to be recognized, of course. But she was recognized, but in the retelling, somehow the strange situation, the most, oft repeated laboratory procedure in the history of psychology is somehow just this thing that exists, and it somehow has to do with John Bowlby.
Interesting. The other interesting thing, Bethany, that you pointed out was it was a picture that grabbed you. You know, this woman spoke to you, and the same thing I saw. Someone sent me a postcard of Catherine Wright with Wilbur and Orville at the White House, and she had this great hat on, and I thought, who is this woman? You know?
Yeah, yeah.
So you have to really be pulled, and then the story is not what you think it will be at the beginning, certainly.
Well, that's for sure. It's a heart thing.
Yeah.
I mean,
I think
speaking of, yeah, I was just going to say, my book actually took 10 years. So it was a long haul.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think research, I love research. I'm a huge research person. So since we're talking about that, I get to ask you, how much research did you do to prepare for this? Like, what kinds of research did you do? You said you did a lot of reading about attachment theory, Bethany, and you obviously, Patty, did a lot of reading around about the Wright brothers. I personally had no idea she existed until your book. I had never heard of it before, ever. So I guess my question is, well, I guess in Patty's book, it's fiction, so you have more leeway, but how much research do you feel obligated to do it? Do you not feel obligated? How much do you do? That kind of thing. Bethany, you want to start?
Well, my book, it wouldn't exist if it weren't for the research, because it is a scientific book. So, that's intrinsic to the book. But the amount of research, I'll put it this way. I never want to write a book like this again. It was so intense. And because I'm not in the field, I'm a poet. I have an MFA. I love the field so much. And I was in touch with many of the big, experts in the field. And I wanted to get it right because it's really important to me. So the pressure was really on, and it is very difficult to get the details right. But what I started doing when I was at the beginning of this process is I started kind of lying my way into these trainings by saying I was writing a book about attachment. Can I come into your lab? What I really meant was I was writing a book proposal, and it was going to take 5, 6, 7 years for me to even write the proposal because it was so difficult to understand this work. So I went and I went to trainings. I went to labs. I asked a lot of people who are still alive about where are Mary Ainsworth's papers, like all of these strange situations, where are the notes? And I got bumped around from this person to that person to the other person. And finally someone said, I think Bob Marvin, who was her protege and her executor, I think he has them in a filing cabinet somewhere. And I said, oh my God. So I looked up Bob Marvin, wrote to him and said, I'm writing a book about attachment and Mary Ainsworth, and can I come and see her papers? And he said, sure. So I went down to Charlottesville, and he showed me her work, and I was the first person to have ever asked.
Wow.
Yeah. So, it was an incredible experience. I heard actual handwritten notes from Uganda, all the onion skin notes from Baltimore. I mean, this was like the treasure trove. And then I got access to the notes from Harvard. So it just, one thing led to another. I went to the archive for the history of psychology in Akron, Ohio. And then I did all these trainings where I got myself into, I learned how to code the strange situation. It was a 2-week training or 1-week training in Minneapolis. And then my husband and I did the adult attachment training in New York City, which is a 2-week intense program that's for psychologists and clinicians. But I just wanted to learn. And the more I did it and people understood that I was serious, then they would say, she's okay, let her in. So it was a lot.
Okay. Patty, how about you?
Well, in my case, I've never done anything like this. Take a real character. Most of my characters are sort of just from my head. So I read everything I could, but unlike a typical historical novel, I did not go to primary sources. I never read letters. I did not go to Dayton, Ohio. You were in Ohio, but I did not go to Dayton, Ohio or Kansas City where she moved because I the voice in my head was so strong of what her letters could be. I thought, I don't want to, hear another voice. However, something, as happens with these things, 2 weeks ago, I got an email from a woman who's just at the same time as my book was coming out, had gone through papers from her stepfather who had died 3 years ago. She wanted to honor him. His great somebody was Catherine Wright's roommate at Oberlin, and there was a correspondence, which she attached in electronic mail, which I printed out from my phone. Catherine Wright would just be heaven to Betsy. She would be shocked. And the voice is not so different. Harry Haskell, her beloved, was coming to dinner. This was the year before she wed. She talked about Orv. So I'm going to begin to do more research. So it's not a typical way to do a historical novel. And I'm beginning to hear from members of the Wright family and
wow.
So backwards. Yeah.
That's exciting.
It's exciting. And but everything kind of was a shadow and then got stronger. I got married for the second time 12 years ago when we went to Kitty Hawk for our honeymoon. And so, Kitty Hawk is where the first plane took place. So, and we're going back in a month. So this place is kind of dear to me, even though Catherine Wright didn't go to Kitty Hawk, but her brothers did.
Amazing.
They flew 12 seconds, 120 feet. And, this is 1903, the same year the first automobile was sold. Before that, it was just trains and bicycles. So,
wow, what a different world.
Yeah.
Wow.
I think Catherine Wright would be appalled, if I may say, that anybody was questioning the Postal Service right now.
Oh.
As he just wrote a book of letters, She thought it was sacred, as do I.
Yeah, the postal office is unbelievable, to be honest. So, Patty, you've been in publishing for a while. This is your 7th book. How has publishing and promoting your book changed over time?
Okay, well, I wrote my first book in the early 80s on a typewriter, same 26 letters that we're using on these newfangled devices, and sent it off in a manila envelope, and it got returned. You had to do a self-addressed stamped envelope, got returned many times, and then I got a telephone call on the landline. So there are all those things that are almost hard to remember. I think one of the differences is there was no expectation. An author could be a shy person. You send in your little black and white photo for the inside jacket, and a writer was not supposed to have a platform and any presence. And so this is that, and I was very comfortable with that. The other thing was certainly reviews. If I got a review, I would get a physical clipping from the publishing house many weeks later, unless I got a call from somebody in Minneapolis that their newspaper had reviewed it. And if it was a good review, I could put it in a scrapbook or on the wall. And if it was a bad review, I could tear it up and no one would know it. And we know how different that is now.
Oh, yes. With the internet,
yes.
Everyone sees everything. How about you, Bethany? What has it been like, since you don't really have that much to gauge? What has this COVID experience done for you, being that you launched in April?
Oh my gosh, it's been so hard. I long for the days that Patty's describing when the writer isn't supposed to be promoting. I mean, I cannot tell you. I feel so weird and kind of guilty for complaining, because I'm so fortunate. I have a book from Random House. I have great reviews. This is the life I wanted. I'm so fortunate. And I am really, it's hard. It's really hard. I'm not a public person. I'm not, I wrote a pretty revealing memoir, but it was that's totally different than this kind of thing. This is lovely, by the way. But, you know, I got on Instagram when COVID hit, and I realized my book was not going to, you know, Random House wasn't going to be able to do their work. So I was going to have to do it. So now I am fully trying to do it. And I wish I could say that I was enjoying it. I'm not particularly. I want people to learn about Mary. I want to turn people on, and I want to help mothers de-shame their experience. And so it's worth it. You know, I'm so behind my book. So it's not that, it's just that it's not, you know, I'd like to be writing.
Yeah, I think for many writers, there's sort of part Emily Dickinson and part waiting for Oprah to call, you know.
Sure. Yes. I wish Oprah would just call so I could get back to writing.
And Emily Dickinson probably wanted Oprah to call.
Of course. Of course.
Yeah, Oprah. So
or Reese.
Yeah.
What'd you say, Patty?
There they are now calling.
Yeah. Oh, maybe that's Oprah now. Yeah, I mean, there's really just such a, you know, it's such a scene. It's such a world. It's so hard. It's so hard. But, you know, it's also exciting because I want to connect to readers. I love hearing from readers. That's such a pleasure. So, yeah, you know, it is what it is, right?
I think also, and your wonderful book, Beauty, Christina, which everybody should buy too, buy Christina's book. For a woman, female writer, the whole issue of looks and how we look on Zoom, and it's crazy making. And yeah, I don't know, will that ever change? And are the men writers worried about whether they have lipstick on their teeth before the Zoom starts, or if they should wear lipstick? And, you know, so we haven't come that far on that thing. But now promoting our books is a curious thing. As a woman gets older, I might say.
Absolutely. Agreed. I think
a lot of that exists for all women. I mean, I've been to events where women are dressed in beautiful dresses, and men have that, you know, that black cap and the jeans and the t-shirt, and I'm like, how do they think that they can do that? Like, it's outrageous, right? But is that?
Yeah, you know, this is a really interesting topic that I haven't really seen much talk about. I
talk about it a lot.
Do you? Okay.
It's become my thing. So, like, whenever I see something or notice something, I'm just kind of, you know, it's amazing to me how a lot of issues that women have filter through fashion. I mean, fashion is a woman, well, in the past especially, was a woman-dominated area, right? Women bought, you know, all those clothes. I mean, now men's fashion is bigger, right? But at the time, you know, years ago, all the designers were male.
Right. Totally.
So, you know, so it's like, you know, and it was harder for women to actually make it because so much of making it is actually having that connection. So, like, even for writers, like, I don't have a connection at the New York Times, but, like, I've heard people say to me, like, people have said to me, you know, you should just, like, write an op-ed and send it and give it to the Times. Like, I did one and I gave it to my buddy, and I'm like, dude, I don't have a buddy.
Yeah.
I got no buddy.
Yeah.
Right. So that's a really huge difference, I think. But, you know, that said, I do want to say that Patty has been so successful. So there are a lot of writers who are going to be watching this and who are watching this. So how do you, and in some ways, Bethany, you can answer this in a different way too, is how do you figure out how to move forward without giving up? Because I think, especially now with COVID, it's so discouraging that people kind of, you know, I find myself, there are days go by and I'm like, oh, I've had COVID brain today. I did absolutely nothing.
Oh, definitely.
So how do you just keep going, and how do you figure out how to get something somewhere? Do you just bang on people's doors? Like, what do you do?
Well, before anybody bangs on doors, I think for me, the most important thing, I mean, sanity is a real challenge. I think for many people and for writers, we're alone so much, working, but you have to do that work. And for me, it's, writing every day or 5 days a week, and days I can't write, don't beat myself up about it. And at the end of a year, I'll have a couple hundred pages. And also exercise. I swim a lot. Walking helps ideas come up. But then when I do have something, I show it to a few people I value their opinions of. And then I do have an agent, but I've had 3 agents. Publishing houses close, agents leave, and I assume nothing. I think the biggest thing for me is not to have and it's a challenge, my self-worth by if I've sold a book, if I get a review, if I get a good review, because that's a dangerous, dangerous road, because it's just, love me, love me, love me, which we all want. For me, teaching is what keeps me balanced. So how do you get published? Just keep sending your work out there. I mean, one of the great things about nowadays is you can send it to many places at once, to many agents, to many publications. Whereas in the old days, it was considered, not polite in the literary world. You had to wait. You couldn't do multiple submissions. So what I would do in earlier times, before times, I'd have a notebook, and I'd write down a list of places, and each time it was returned, I'd send it out. I'd have the envelope ready. And on this right now, I do too. It's like you just need one place, that's it. But worrying about success and all, dangerous, dangerous road. My first book was published, at the time it seemed like I was young, but I was in my mid-30s. I had written 2 before I didn't sell. Then it was sold to the movies. It was a bit overwhelming for me. It didn't necessarily make me happier. So I think you have to be watchful of that.
I think that notebook idea is really huge. I think if structure and actually having things down makes it easier, because it's not something that's in your mind. You're not trying to create the impossible. The possible is actually on the page, but you just have to keep crossing one off and sending it somewhere else, and then crossing it off. It's just like, don't even take it personally, right? Like, that's so key, not to take it personally.
And I haven't sold all my books. I think I've written 10 books, sold 7. I've written many, many essays I didn't sell. And you can spend a little time thinking, but how come this person did? But that's total waste. It goes or doesn't.
How about you, Bethany? You took 10 years to write your book. I can relate to that. It took me 14 years to write Beauty. So,
oh, wow. Well, I have to read your book. I can't wait.
Well, I just researched everything. Like I'm not, maybe it's a procrastination kind of
I
thing.
think there's a little bit of that in there for me, for sure.
Right. But I the subject matter changed with every chapter, it seems. So I had to kind of read up and try to understand what was going on every single thing. And it's so hard to do that and I was always afraid, and I guess this is really important too. I was afraid that someone would show up and be like, that's not right.
Oh, completely.
And I think when you do that, you're worrying about something that may or may not happen. And if it happens, so what? It's like Patty says, if you get the review, that's awesome. But if you don't get a review, get back to writing, right?
Yeah, exactly.
How about you?
So Strange Situation is actually, I'm thinking maybe my 4th book proposal. So I've spent, and book proposals for nonfiction books takes a long time. And so I had written and tried to sell 3 books before this one. And this one was was revised repeatedly. And so, I had been trying to sell a book since Azalea was born. And she's 14, since I became pregnant. My husband and I lived at a monastery, and then we moved and decided to have a baby. And so from the minute I left the monastery, I said, okay, I'm going to write books, and I'm going to help other people. And because I had been a writing instructor before that. And so it took, 15 years for me to finally sell a book. Now I'm thrilled, but the other book proposals were great too, but they didn't catch. The first one was almost sold, and then the crash of 2008 happened. Whatever. I've had a bunch of different agents. I finally have one who, the synergy was right. So for me, and I'm so glad you asked the question, because I really am so thrilled and honored to be able to encourage writers to not get caught in that. And that when you have a story that you have no choice but to tell, there you go. And just keep at it, and don't ever let anybody get in your way. I used to get up at 3. I wrote my book at 3:30 in the morning because I have a day job and a child and, life. And so I would get up really, really early. And I told myself that nobody was ever going to read it. And that was my little trick to myself, so that I didn't have to deal with those crazy voices critiquing me. And, before I had even gotten the thing on the page. So I got up, and when it was quiet, I think, Patty, you can probably relate to this. It sounds like you listened to your characters. When I could hear Mary, I could hear myself. And I just told the story I had to tell. And then I could do some of the research and stuff in the afternoons. But it's really important to honor yourself in these processes.
It's so great to talk with you both, because in my character, so I get up at 3 a.m. and write. And so I had Catherine go sit in the empty bathtub and write in her journal. So
wow, Patty,
women do, right?
This is what women do. And 3 a.m., as you know, Patty, is the witching hour.
Yeah. Yeah, you just sort of propelled, sort of pulled to the machine or any kind of device. Writing.
To the voice. I mean, things are the world is so quiet at that time.
Yeah.
So both of you are parents, and I am also. I have actually taken moments in my life and felt that I should write or include them in stories in some shape. And one of the issues that I always bump up against is, how do you know that it's okay? Like, it's your kid, right? So obviously there are issues about privacy. There are issues about how they feel, what they think, or some authors want to memorialize their kids in their work, so they write about them that way. So how do you navigate doing that? Like, do you have your kids look at your work? Do you keep it away from them? How do you do that? Patty, you want to start?
Sure. I also am a mother. My son is 24 and he's adopted. So attachment issues of interest to me. And I did write too. I wrote a book about adoption, The Baby Boat, years ago. And so when he was quite young. And I didn't ask his permission, but he enjoys the book. Then when my first husband got sick with brain cancer, when he was, my son was 3.5, I asked my husband if it was okay. So, I think the whole family, it's writing about family as well as parents. It was okay with my husband to write about his cancer. Since then, I have written some essays that have included my son and some difficult things, and I've asked his permission. I am not of the school that, to heck with it, whomever you hurt. I love my loved ones. So, and words are powerful. So it's true. When my son was young, he could have looked back and not approved, but he just, he lives in Arizona, and he just FaceTimed me and showed me new apartment, and he had the baby boat, this book, and another book up on a shelf. So
Oh, so
Aw.
sweet.
I don't know if he's read it, but he did get
Patty
it.
recently had a short piece in Modern Love, right, in the New York Times. It was a shorter version, but it was so amazing. It was so moving, and so if you get a chance to look at that, definitely.
Oh, I can't wait.
I would say, people have had, there's modern love, and then there are the tiny love stories, which are 100 words. And for those who write spare or write poetry, they're really fun. I've had a few of the longer modern love ones too, and just keep sending them in. Again, what the heck? You just send them in. Press send. And don't fret. Don't continue to think, why didn't it? One of them might take, or send them someplace else. Boston Globe has a good 650-word essay at the back of their magazine, Sunday magazine, called Connections on Family Relations. They take all kinds of things.
How about you, Bethany?
So, my book is about me having a difficult time as a mother to my baby. So it was a very sensitive, topic, the only thing that has really ever woken me up in the middle of the night with fear, like, oh my God, what am I doing? Is she going to be so hurt to grow, when she reads it and it reads in such detail of how difficult that was for me. And so that was very, very difficult. So the way I balanced it out with talking to lots and lots of people whom I trust, and really feeling like I'm willing to I'm going to be very judicious, and I'm not going to share things about her personal life. It's really about me. And I think it's worth it, because I hope to help so many mothers and parents like myself to see that it's not just okay to be human, but it's what the doctor ordered. We really need to embrace our shadow selves, the whole Megillah. This is what the science of attachment tells us. And so in addition to that, I had her godfather, the person that, in our will she would go to if anything happens to us. And I asked him to read the manuscript with her in mind explicitly, like word for word, like be her, imagine what it's like. What is she going to feel like when she reads this, when she's, 10, 20, 30, and tell me, I want to know. And he, like so many people who read it before I published it, said, it's about you. It's not about her. And if anything, it's about how much you love her, and she is going to love it. And so before it was published, I did ask her, would you like to read it? I was terrified. And she said, not right now. And so she has not read it. And when it came out, I actually wrote to our little community of parents and told everybody, Azalea has chosen not to read it. So please, keep it a little on the DL so that her friends aren't reading it and then talking to her about it. Let's give her some space around this. And then regarding my family, I read Mary Carr in her book about memoir, how she had everybody read her work. And I thought, wow, if Mary Carr can do that, I can do that. So and my book is about my childhood. And I asked everybody in my family if they wanted to read it. And my mother read it like 17 times in a row. My one brother read it, and my other brother said, no, thanks. So, and my father is dead. And so I asked his brother to read it on his behalf. So I thought that was a really bold move, that if she could do it with the kind of stuff she's writing about, like you say, Patty, I actually love my loved ones, and I don't want to upset anybody. And I definitely don't think it's not worth it to risk that. I think it was very worth it. And I have a much, much stronger relationship with all of them because of it.
Yes, I think so. For me as a fiction writer, I fictionalize everything, so nothing's real. But I always have this thing about there's the difference between incriminating and self-incriminating.
Yeah, totally.
I'm perfectly willing to go to this self-incriminating, however that might make me look. But I always worry about yeah, I guess attachment, right? Like, because trust is such a hard thing to get back once you destroy a thing like that. But okay, back to this. So, how do you think Me Too played into your book coming out now? Do you think? I don't personally think my book would have come out at this point if Me Too had not happened. Maybe it would have, but for me it was like great timing. What do you think about that, Patty?
How COVID has, would my book have come out? I think so, because it turns out that it happened to be the 100th anniversary of the women's vote, and Catherine Wright had been a suffragist, but she's a privileged white woman. I don't know if that necessarily would have been top of the list, what they would be getting. So I feel very fortunate that it was published. As far as the publishing experience, I did one bookstore reading on the Cape, and there were so many more people than if I'd gone there in person. I would have had 20 people. So in some ways, COVID makes it sort of a universal experience. But I think everything also is reviews can come out at strange times. It used to be, if you don't get reviewed within those first 2 weeks, it's gone. And now, I hear people hearing 6 months, a year later, things are published.
I just heard someone had their book reviewed after 2 years.
Yeah.
So that can happen.
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Christina, were you asking about Me Too?
Yes.
And okay.
I was asking about how the timing of it with your book.
Got it.
That it helped your book?
I think that, certainly, it's about a woman. But I don't know if that was really, because my book was coming out, was bought before all of that happened. But it certainly doesn't hurt, for sure. I was actually one of the original architects of the Antioch sexual offense policy in the 90s. So we were like the original Me Too, people who wrote this policy that was lampooned across the country. And so when Me Too happened, I could not believe it, that this was now, it was even before Me Too, but when affirmative consent became a thing, and it was totally based on the Antioch policy, I was just in shock, because I went sort of into hiding after that whole thing, because it was so humiliating and so difficult to be called out in that way as like a feminazi, and the whole thing, which of course we were in a certain sense. But so my relationship to the Me Too movement is complex, and I'm glad that any opportunity to get women's stories out is certainly going to help Mary.
Well, I think sometimes people's ideas are a little bit ahead of where we are in society. So sometimes they kind of bounce off people instead of getting absorbed. And
that's so true. That's so
right?
True.
And I always think about this designer. Her name's she's the designer for Comme des Garçons. It's a very famous high fashion, whatever. And I used to, before I actually understood anything about fashion, I would look and be like, what? Like, what is that? I could not understand how something like that, could be fashionable. But then when I started to do more research, I realized, oh my God, this woman was writing about her clothes were androgynous. This is like in the late 80s and early 90s. Like, way ahead of where we are now. So
yeah,
who knows where we're headed? Right.
Good point.
Right. So what is your writing life like now, since you are promoting your book? We're all on lockdown. The world seems a scarier place. I've heard a lot of authors have issues with their writing, right? So have you been having issues, and if so, how do you deal with them? Bethany?
I am finally writing again. which I'm really excited about. And I'm working on a novel, actually. Like I said, no more research for me in book form. And so I'm really enjoying, I'm doing a lot of work to promote the book, which I think is just going to go on and on and on. And I'm also working with authors as a book coach, which I'm really, really enjoying. Sort of like you were saying, Patty, with the teaching, it just keeps it very balanced. But if I really, if I was independently wealthy, I'll be honest, I probably would do less of that and be writing my novel more. But what I'm doing now is I'm taking a screenwriting class, actually, and I'm really enjoying it. I'm learning how to create scenes, because that's not something that I know a lot about, from poetry to heavy duty nonfiction and memoir. So it's been pure delight. I'm having such a great time, and trying to carve out more time, and sometimes have to take the weekends away from the family so that I can do that. But I feel like since COVID and feeling just completely frozen for a long time, first, watching the tsunami come after my book launch after 10 years was just unbelievable. And so, working through the trauma of that, and then just getting out of this freeze, I'm finally starting to have some creative life back. So that's, a mitzvah.
Awesome. Patty?
I would say my writing life hasn't changed that much. Walk and write. I think the time Zoom teaching is a little, physically the hunching, I have to sort of, and I haven't been able to swim inside. So sometimes I'm, a little more irritable than usual. But I think that writing, I don't have any excuse for not writing. It always takes me about 5 years to write a book, and I'm just, I think I have an idea right now, but so I'm just sort of fiddling around on the piano, as it were. But I don't think COVID has affected me that much. I mean, I guess I would say I get depressed and have this roller coaster of emotions that so many people do. And in The Right Sister, she feels estranged. She's 600 miles away from her brother. So she found great love being married, and she lost the love of her brother. And I'm very interested in those pulls. And I'm feeling that now. I haven't seen my son, in months. He's in Arizona. My mother died during COVID. I couldn't see her at the end. All these emotional things, I just have to remember to throw into writing. And certainly there are times when I can't. I just am a wreck. But then I shape it into the writing. I think there were times when I was very lonely in my marriage and missing people, and I threw it into the book. So I just always am, it's like a compost heap of emotions that keep shaping. So it's magnified with COVID, but I'm alive, I'm healthy. How lucky. And we didn't lose our jobs. I mean, I did lose my teaching job, so I'm teaching privately, but the amount of suffering is extraordinary right now. So I can't get too irritable, although I do.
Yeah.
So we are a little bit over time, but I just want to ask, since we're going to close this, is there one piece of advice that you could give to everyone out there who's watching right now? Bethany? Regarding writing, regarding writing.
I think, like I said before, find the story that you have no choice but to tell, and then don't listen to any of the voices who tell you otherwise, and just tell it exactly as you see it, and don't let anything get in your way.
How about you, Patty?
I think what Bethany said is so wise, and maybe it's the exact same thing, but added on is, do not think of the marketplace when you're writing, because it keeps shifting. And some people can fake it writing and write, but I'm not a journalist. I can't write some assignment I don't care about. So it's the same as Bethany says, right from your heart. Yeah.
What about you, Christina? What's your
advice? My advice is, well, never give up. I think there are moments when you can give up for a little while, but always come back. Like, always make sure that notebook is open, the computer's out. I have this kind of, I don't know if it's like, baseball players have their luck things, and for me, I can't turn my computer off. I have this fear of turning it off. Maybe it's because I've lost stuff before, but yeah, I try not to turn it off. And I think if there's anything I've learned in life, it's that, and in writing, it's that you have to just keep plugging, and you can't look at the finish line. You have to look at like the 2 feet in front of you. Just keep going those 2 feet, keep going the 2 feet, and eventually you will have that book, right? But if you think I need to write the whole book, it's going to be so daunting that you're not going to be able to do it. So just look right in front of you, stay right in the now, stay here, stay with it, and it'll happen. Yep. So thank you all for joining us. Patty and Bethany, please hang on. And I hope to see you next week. Thanks so much, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.